The room went silent the moment the CEO looked at me. Not the polite kind of silence you hear at charity galas when someone taps a champagne glass with a spoon. This was different, heavy, sharp, like the air itself had cracked open. My sister was still smiling when it started. She had one manicured hand wrapped around a crystal wine glass, and the other resting possessively on Ethan Carlyle's arm, the Ethan Carlyle. Billionaire defense contractor, magazine covers, private jets. The kind of man people in Texas talked about like royalty. Vanessa had spent the entire evening showing him off. And 5 seconds earlier, she'd laughed in my face. Honestly, she'd said loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear the military really takes anyone these days, huh? People chuckled. Then she pointed proudly at Ethan and added, "Now that is what a real leader looks like." I remember the smell of her expensive perfume drifting through the ballroom while everyone waited for me to react. I remember the heat from the chandeliers overhead, the sting of humiliation climbing slowly up my neck. But before I could say a word, Ethan froze. His eyes locked onto mine like he'd seen a ghost. And then, in front of 200 wealthy guests, he stepped away from my sister and asked the question that turned her face white. "Excuse me, are you Major Claire Donovan?" The sound of my sister's glass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the marble floor was the only thing anyone heard next. I smiled and nodded. Dallas in October still carried summer in its bones. Even after sunset, the air outside Vanessa's mansion felt warm against my skin as I sat in my Jeep for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the glowing estate in front of me. Every window blazed with golden light. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Valets moved back and forth like shadows in pressed black suits, while soft jazz drifted from somewhere inside the house. I almost drove away. Not because I was afraid of Vanessa. Because I already knew exactly how the night would go. My sister had spent most of our adult lives trying to erase where she came from, and unfortunately for her, I was still living proof of it. I looked down at my phone, one unread text from Vanessa. "Try not to embarrass me tonight." No hello, no smiley face, no happy to see you. Just that. I slipped my phone back into my purse and stepped out of the Jeep. The humid Texas air wrapped around me immediately. I adjusted the simple navy dress I'd bought 3 years earlier for a Pentagon fundraiser and closed the car door quietly behind me. Compared to the women drifting through Vanessa's party in diamonds and silk gowns, I probably looked invisible. Good. That had always been my preference. As I walked toward the entrance, memories hit me harder than I expected. Our father standing in the kitchen at 5 in the morning before factory shifts pouring coffee into an old thermos. Vanessa at 17 furious because his pickup truck dropped her off at school in front of wealthier kids. Me sitting silently beside him afterward while he pretended not to care. He did the best he could, I'd once told her. That's exactly the problem she'd snapped back. The valet reached for my keys, but I shook my head politely. "I'm fine, thank you." His eyes flickered briefly toward my Jeep before he forced a professional smile. I recognized that look too. People often assumed things based on appearances. Military life teaches you not to take it personally. Inside the ballroom looked like something from a luxury wedding magazine. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead. Servers carried silver trays filled with champagne. A string quartet played near the staircase while wealthy donors, politicians, and executives laughed beneath towering flower arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And right in the center of it all stood Vanessa. My older sister wore a fitted white gown that hugged her like poured cream. Diamonds flashed at her throat when she turned toward me. For half a second, I saw something genuine in her expression, recognition, maybe even memory. Then it vanished. "There you are," she said, air-kissing my cheek without touching it. "Claire, thank God. I was starting to think you'd show up in uniform." I gave a small smile. "Good to see you, too." Her eyes drifted over my dress. Calm, clinical. "That's simple. It's a dinner, Vanessa, not the Oscars." A couple standing nearby laughed awkwardly. Vanessa leaned closer. "You'd be surprised how important appearances are in this world." I almost answered, but years in the army had taught me something valuable. Silence makes insecure people nervous. So I simply looked around the ballroom. Vanessa mistook my silence for discomfort and relaxed immediately. "Come on," she said brightly. "There are people you should meet." That should have warned me. Vanessa never introduced me to anyone unless there was something in it for her. She guided me through clusters of wealthy guests, one hand lightly pressing against my elbow, as though steering me into position. "This is my younger sister Claire," she announced to a group near the bar. "She works in the military." "Works in the military? Not serves? Not officer? Not major? Just works?" One older man smiled politely. "Thank you for your service." Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed. "Oh, she's not one of those action hero types. Claire's more behind the scenes, paperwork, logistics, that kind of thing." A few people nodded with visible relief. Apparently, I had become less threatening once reduced to office work. I sipped my sparkling water quietly while Vanessa continued. "You know, Claire always needed structure," she said. "The army was probably the only place willing to put up with her." The group chuckled. Something inside my chest tightened, not from embarrassment anymore, but from exhaustion. This wasn't new. Vanessa had spent our entire lives turning me into the smaller version of myself whenever an audience was present. At 14, she told classmates my clothes came from thrift stores. At 22, she introduced me at a party as the sister who couldn't handle real-world competition. At Dad's funeral, she'd complained that military honors made the service feel depressing. And somehow, despite all of it, part of me still kept hoping she'd change. Honestly, Vanessa continued swirling champagne in her glass. "The military really takes anyone these days, huh?" Laughter rippled through the group. Then came the final blow. She gestured proudly across the ballroom toward a tall man speaking with investors near the staircase. That, she said, smiling broadly, is what a real leader looks like. I followed her gaze. Ethan Carlisle. Tall, silver at the temples, calm posture, the kind of confidence that came from decades of power. I knew exactly who he was. Everyone in defense circles did. But what surprised me wasn't seeing him. It was the instant shift in his expression when his eyes landed on mine. He stopped mid-conversation. Completely. One investor kept talking while Ethan stared directly across the ballroom at me with visible confusion. Then recognition. My stomach tightened slightly. Oh no. Vanessa noticed his attention and beamed proudly, assuming he was admiring her. Instead, Ethan handed his drink to a waiter and walked straight toward us. The closer he came, the quieter the room became. Vanessa's smile widened. "See," she whispered to me. "That's the difference between successful people and—" She stopped speaking when Ethan reached us. He barely glanced at her. His eyes stayed fixed on mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked quietly, almost carefully, "Excuse me, are you Major Claire Donovan?" The entire ballroom went still. And beside me, I heard my sister's champagne glass slip from her trembling fingers and explode against the marble floor. For 3 full seconds after the glass shattered, nobody moved. The sound echoed across the ballroom like a gunshot. Champagne spread across the marble floor in glittering streams, while broken crystal skidded beneath expensive shoes. Somewhere near the orchestra, a violinist stopped playing mid-note. And still Ethan Carlisle kept looking directly at me. Not casually. Not curiously. Like a man who had just stumbled across something impossible. Vanessa recovered first. She let out a nervous laugh and touched Ethan's arm lightly. "Honey, I think you might have the wrong person." Her voice sounded too high now, stretched thin beneath the pressure. "Claire just does administrative work for the army." I almost winced. Not because the comment hurt. Because I knew exactly what was about to happen next. Ethan never looked away from me. "Administrative work," he repeated slowly. Vanessa nodded quickly. "Yeah, mostly paperwork and scheduling, I think." I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me again. Some curious, some embarrassed on my behalf, others simply eager for drama. The warm ballroom suddenly felt too bright. Then Ethan did something no one expected. He stepped forward and extended both hands toward me. Not a casual handshake. A respectful one. The kind senior officers used when greeting someone whose reputation already spoke for itself. "Major Donovan," he said quietly, "it's an honor to finally meet you." A silence heavier than the first one settled over the room. Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. I shook his hand once, firm, professional. "Good evening, Mr. Carlisle." He gave a short laugh under his breath. "After the number of meetings where your name came up, please, call me Ethan." The people standing closest to us exchanged confused looks. I understood why. To them, Ethan Carlisle was untouchable. The kind of CEO senators waited weeks to meet. Men like him did not walk across crowded ballrooms to greet unnoticed women in simple dresses. But military circles worked differently. Respect there wasn't built on money. It was built on who people trusted when things went bad. Vanessa finally found her voice again. "Wait, you two know each other." "Not personally," Ethan said. His eyes returned to me with unmistakable admiration. "But everyone in my field knows who Major Donovan is." I saw it hit Vanessa physically. Her shoulders stiffened. A tiny flicker of panic crossed her face before she buried it beneath another brittle smile. "Well," she said lightly, "Claire never talks about work. She's always been kind of private." Private. That was one word for it. The truth was simpler. Most of what I'd done over the last decade wasn't meant for dinner conversations. Ethan nodded slowly. "That makes sense." One of the investors nearby finally spoke up. "I'm sorry," he said awkwardly, "should we know who Major Donovan is?" Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Then he glanced back at me silently asking permission. I gave the smallest shrug. "Nothing classified." "Not anymore." Ethan turned toward the group. 2 years ago during the Syrian extraction operation outside Raqqa Major, Donovan coordinated the evacuation route that saved 17 American personnel. The room went still again. I felt Vanessa staring at me now. Hard. Ethan continued calmly. Communications were compromised. Drone surveillance was failing. Half the convoy was trapped. One older man frowned. "Wait, that operation was all over the news." "It was," Ethan replied. What wasn't public was how close it came to becoming a disaster. His eyes shifted toward me again. Major Donovan made the decision to reroute the convoy through hostile territory after satellite intel changed unexpectedly. Someone whispered Jesus. Ethan nodded once. Most officers would have waited for confirmation. She didn't. Because waiting would have gotten people killed. I remembered the heat of that night instantly. The smell of burning rubber, sand grinding against my skin beneath body armor. A young corporal beside me trying not to panic while radio chatter collapsed into static. I remembered making the call. And I remembered the silence afterward when everyone realized the route had actually worked. 17 Americans came home because of that decision. But I never thought about it much anymore. You can't survive in the military if you replay every operation forever. Vanessa laughed suddenly. Too loudly. Well, she said Claire always was dramatic. Nobody laughed with her this time. Not one person. Ethan's expression cooled slightly. With respect, Vanessa, dramatic isn't the word I'd use. The shift in the room became almost visible. An hour earlier, Vanessa had controlled everything here. Every conversation, every glance, every ounce of admiration. Now people were looking at her differently. And looking at me in ways she clearly didn't understand. A waiter approached carefully with towels for the spilled champagne, but Vanessa waved him away sharply. Her eyes never left me. "What exactly do you do now?" she asked. The question sounded casual. It wasn't. It sounded like someone trying desperately to regain control of a situation slipping through her fingers. I answered simply, "Strategic Operations Consulting." One guest blinked, "For the Pentagon." "Sometimes." Ethan gave another short laugh. That's one way to put it. Then he turned toward the group again. Major Donovan authored the operational assessment currently being used in 3 separate national defense modernization programs. Several faces around us changed instantly. Even civilians recognized what that meant. Billions of dollars. Federal oversight. National security. One woman near the bar actually straightened her posture before speaking to me again. Vanessa noticed that too. Her face lost more color. "That can't be right," she said quietly. I looked at her gently. "Why not?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And for the first time all evening I saw something underneath Vanessa's confidence that I hadn't seen since we were children. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear that the story she'd spent 20 years building about herself might suddenly collapse. Because Vanessa's entire identity depended on one thing. Believing she had escaped people like us. People from our neighborhood. Our father's old truck. Discount grocery stores. Second-hand clothes. Sacrifice. Service. Duty. She'd spent years reinventing herself around wealthy people who admired success above everything else. And now one of the richest men in the room was treating the sister she mocked like someone extraordinary. Ethan studied me carefully for another moment. You know, he said, I've actually been trying to contact you for over a year. That surprised even me. You have? Yes, he smiled slightly. Your office kept declining invitations. Because I kept declining them personally. Corporate defense events exhausted me. Too many cameras, too many speeches from people who treated war like a stock market. Vanessa stared between us in disbelief. You wanted to meet Claire? Ethan finally looked directly at her again. Yes. One sharp syllable. Nothing more. But it landed like a hammer. A nearby retired colonel who'd been listening quietly stepped closer, then studying me for a second before recognition dawned across his face. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Donovan. I recognized him immediately. Colonel Harris. Retired now. Older. Broader around the middle. But still sharp-eyed. He grinned suddenly. Folks, you're looking at the officer who refused a Silver Star ceremony because she said her team deserved the attention more than she did. Several guests turned toward me in shock. Vanessa looked like she physically couldn't breathe anymore. And honestly, that part hurt more than I expected. Because under all the humiliation, all the cruelty, all the years of distance, she truly never knew me at all. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom stage where the event coordinator stood frozen in confusion. Then he looked back at me. Major Donovan, he said carefully, would you do me the honor of staying a while longer tonight? Across the room, every eye turned toward Vanessa. And for the first time in her life, my sister was no longer the most important person in the room. The strangest part about watching someone lose power is how quiet it looks at first. Vanessa didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not yet. She simply stood there with perfect posture and dead eyes, while the ballroom slowly drifted away from her like a tide pulling back from shore. I recognized the feeling because I'd seen it happen during military briefings before. The moment someone realizes control is gone, but their pride hasn't caught up to reality yet. Around us, conversations had completely changed direction. People who barely acknowledged me an hour earlier were suddenly asking questions. What branch are you with? How long have you served? Were you really overseas during the extraction? Even the body language shifted. Men who'd spent the evening competing for Ethan Carlisle's attention now angled themselves subtly toward me instead. Vanessa noticed every second of it. And she hated it. I answered politely but carefully. Years in military intelligence teach you how to speak without actually saying very much. Yes, ma'am. It was a long deployment. I worked with a strong team. Never too much detail, never enough ego to sound impressed with myself. Ironically, that seemed to fascinate them even more. People trusted restraint. Especially older Americans. Especially people who still believed service meant something. Colonel Harris chuckled beside me while sipping bourbon. That right there, he told one guest pointing lightly in my direction, is exactly why the brass respected her. I gave him a warning look. He ignored it completely. She had officers twice her age trying to impress people in briefing rooms while she was busy solving problems. Vanessa finally interrupted. Claire always liked attention when we were kids, too. The comment dropped awkwardly into the conversation. Nobody responded. Because by now everyone could hear the bitterness beneath her smile. Ethan noticed it too. He turned toward her slowly. Attention, he repeated. Vanessa laughed lightly. You know how younger siblings are. I could feel her trying to reshape the narrative in real time, trying to shrink me back down into the role she understood best, awkward little sister from a poor family. But reality had already moved beyond her control. Colonel Harris frowned faintly. Actually, he said Major Donovan was known for avoiding publicity. He glanced toward me with amusement. Hell, she practically disappeared after that Syria operation. I transferred assignments, I said calmly. You vanished, he corrected. That part was true. After Syria, reporters started circling. Journalists wanted interviews. Defense publications wanted profiles. Politicians wanted photographs beside decorated officers. I hated all of it. Not because I was humble. Because I remembered the names carved into memorial walls, and publicity always felt strange when other families had buried their children. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. Well, she certainly never mentioned any of this to me. The sentence sounded innocent, but underneath it sat a deeper accusation. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her quietly for a moment before answering. You never asked. That one landed. Her jaw tightened instantly. For a second I saw the old Vanessa again, the one from childhood who couldn't stand losing an argument. Then Ethan spoke. Actually, he said thoughtfully, that explains something. Vanessa forced a smile toward him. What explains what? Ethan glanced at me. Last year during the Arlington Defense Summit, someone quoted one of your strategic recommendations during a closed session. A few nearby executives straightened immediately. They clearly knew the meeting he meant. Ethan continued. Half the room thought the proposal came from a retired 4-star general. One man blinked. Wait, that was her. Ethan nodded once. When they realized it had come from an active-duty female officer, under 40 people were stunned. Vanessa stared at me as though she no longer recognized my face. I understood why. In her world, value came from visible status. Luxury brands, private clubs, perfect homes, public admiration. But military respect works differently. Sometimes the most important people are the quietest people in the room. A server approached, carrying fresh champagne. Vanessa grabbed a glass too quickly. Her fingers trembled slightly now. Ethan noticed that too. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine, she answered immediately. Too quickly. Too sharply. Then she turned toward me with a bright smile so artificial it almost hurt to watch. You know what's funny? She said loudly. Claire used to cry if somebody raised their voice at her. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa kept going anyway. She was always sensitive. Dad used to say she took everything personally. That did it. For the first time all night, something cold moved through my chest. Not anger. Protectiveness. Because she had dragged our father into it. And worse, she was lying. Dad never said that. Our father rarely criticized anyone, especially me. He used to tell people I was the strongest person he knew. I set my glass down carefully. You don't have to do this, Vanessa. Something in my voice finally made her pause. But only for a second. Oh, please, she snapped quietly. You walk in here pretending to be humble while everybody suddenly worships you. I didn't ask for any of this, but you're enjoying it. That accusation carried years behind it. Years of resentment I never fully understood. Because the truth was, Vanessa had always been the beautiful one. The charismatic one. The girl teachers loved and boys chased and adults praised. I spent most of my childhood trying not to take up space. Yet somehow she still saw me as competition. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. Vanessa. No, she cut in. I'm serious. Claire has always loved playing the martyr. The ballroom had gone quieter again. People were pretending not to listen now, which meant they were listening to every word. I sighed softly. You know what I said? I think I should leave. Honestly, I meant it. I was tired. Tired of defending myself, tired of watching Vanessa tear people down whenever she felt threatened, tired of pretending tonight hadn't hurt. I reached for my purse. Then Colonel Harris spoke again. You know, he said casually to the nearby group, there's something funny about all this. Vanessa looked at him sharply. The colonel took another sip of bourbon. A few years back there was an intelligence review involving a defense contract leak. Pentagon almost lost billions. Several executives immediately looked uneasy. Even Ethan straightened slightly. Colonel Harris nodded toward me. Major Donovan uncovered the security flaw herself. One investor frowned. Wait. Carlyle Defense was connected to that audit. Ethan looked genuinely stunned now. That was you. I hadn't realized he didn't know. I nodded once, partially. Partially, Colonel Harris barked a laugh. Son, she practically saved your company. The room exploded into whispers. Vanessa's face drained completely of color. Ethan stared at me in disbelief for several seconds before speaking quietly. My God. Then he said the sentence that finally shattered whatever illusion Vanessa still clung to. If Major Donovan hadn't caught that vulnerability, he told the room Carlisle Defense could have lost a $4 billion federal contract. Silence. Absolute silence. Vanessa looked like she might collapse. And standing there beneath crystal chandeliers, surrounded by wealthy strangers who suddenly respected the sister she'd mocked all evening. My sister finally understood something terrifying. The person she spent years looking down on had quietly become someone the most powerful people in the room admired. After that, the party stopped feeling like an engagement celebration. It became something else entirely. A reckoning. You could see it in the way people moved through the ballroom now. Conversations no longer revolved around Vanessa's wedding flowers or Ethan's business empire. Instead, guests kept drifting toward me in slow waves, curiosity pulling them closer despite themselves. A retired senator asked about veteran housing initiatives. A woman from a military charity wanted to know whether I'd ever considered public speaking. One older couple simply thanked me for serving. And through all of it, Vanessa stood near the grand staircase holding her champagne glass, like an anchor watching her perfect evening dissolve inch by inch. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Ethan remained beside me most of the night, though not possessively, respectfully. He listened more than he talked, which surprised me. Men in his position usually filled silence with stories about themselves. But Ethan kept asking questions. Real questions. What made you join? Did your father influence that decision? Do you miss active deployment? There was sincerity in his voice that made answering difficult. My father served before I was born, I told him quietly. Not long, but it shaped him. Ethan nodded slowly. The good ones usually carry it forever. That sentence lingered with me. Because it was true. Military service leaves fingerprints on people. Even decades later, you notice it in the way veterans sit facing doors in restaurants, in how they scan crowds automatically, in how they rarely talk about the hardest moments unless another veteran is listening. Across the ballroom, Vanessa suddenly laughed too loudly at something nobody had said. The sound snapped my attention toward her. She was talking rapidly now to a cluster of guests near the bar, trying to reclaim the spotlight by sheer force of personality, but people's smiles looked strained. Desperate energy makes others uncomfortable. And Vanessa was becoming desperate. A few minutes later, she crossed the ballroom toward us with determined elegance. Every movement looked controlled. Only her eyes betrayed her. "Claire," she said brightly, "can I talk to you for a second?" I already knew that tone. It meant smile now, fight privately. Ethan glanced between us carefully. "Everything all right?" "Of course," Vanessa answered instantly. Then she added through clenched teeth, "Just sister things." I followed her down a quieter hallway toward the study near the back of the mansion. The moment the door closed behind us, her entire expression changed. The warmth vanished. "So this was your plan?" she hissed. I blinked once. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent with me." She spun toward the fireplace, arms folded tightly across her white gown. "You walk in here pretending to be humble while everybody suddenly acts like you're some kind of war hero." "I never said that." "You didn't have to." The anger pouring out of her now felt old, ancient, like she'd been carrying it for years, waiting for permission to release it. "You love this," she snapped. "You love making me look shallow." I stared at her in disbelief. "Vanessa, you spent the entire night insulting me. Because you always judge me." That stunned me more than the shouting. Because in her mind, this wasn't about cruelty. It was about insecurity. I exhaled slowly. "You think I came here to embarrass you? Didn't you?" "No." She laughed bitterly. "Please, you always had this thing where people wanted to admire you for suffering quietly." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said softly, "You really don't know me at all anymore." That hit harder than yelling would have. Her face flickered. Briefly. Then the wall came back up. "You know what your problem is?" she said coldly. "You still think being honorable matters more than being successful." I looked around the massive study. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, imported artwork, marble fireplace, everything curated to signal wealth. And suddenly I understood something painful. Vanessa had spent so many years chasing status that she genuinely believed love and respect had to be earned through appearances. "Are you happy?" I asked quietly. She froze. The question clearly caught her off guard. What? Are you actually happy? Her jaw tightened instantly. That's none of your business. That answer told me everything. I noticed the stack of unopened bills partly hidden beneath a designer handbag on the desk nearby. Past due notices peeked from the edges. Interesting. Then I remembered something else. 3 months earlier, someone from a financial consulting firm tied to Carlyle Defense had quietly contacted a Pentagon office regarding concerns about confidential information leaks involving outside social connections. At the time, I'd ignored the name attached to the inquiry. Vanessa Donovan. A cold realization settled in my stomach. How much debt are you in? I asked carefully. Her face changed instantly. There it is, she whispered, that judgmental look. Vanessa. Don't. She turned away sharply. But silence tells the truth faster than words. And suddenly pieces clicked together. The extravagant engagement. The frantic social climbing. The obsession with marrying Ethan. This wasn't just ambition anymore. This was survival. You're in trouble, I said softly. She whirled around. You think you're better than me because you wore a uniform. No. Then stop looking at me like I'm pathetic. I'm not. But she already believed it. That was the tragedy. Not the money. Not the lies. The fact that my sister genuinely thought worth came from impressing rich strangers. Then the study door opened unexpectedly. Ethan stood there. And from the expression on his face, I immediately realized how much he'd heard. Enough. More than enough. Vanessa went pale. Ethan. He looked at her quietly. Your father was an alcoholic. The room went still. I felt something twist sharply inside my chest. Because there it was. The lie. Vanessa swallowed hard. I explained that wrong. Ethan's gaze didn't move. You told me he drank himself into irrelevance after military service. Silence. I could barely breathe now. Our father had worked double shifts for 23 years after leaving the army. He missed birthdays, holidays, school plays. Not because he was careless. Because he was trying to feed us. And yes, after Mom died, there were nights he drank too much beer alone in the garage. But he was never what she described. Never. He earned a Bronze Star, I said quietly. Ethan's eyes shifted toward me slowly. I continued before emotion could close my throat. He spent most of his life trying to give us stability. Vanessa looked trapped now. Cornered. And for the first time all evening, Ethan's disappointment became visible. Not anger. Worse. Disillusionment. You lied to me, he said softly. Vanessa stepped toward him immediately. No, You were ashamed of him. That one landed like a blade. Because it was true. And everybody in the room knew it. Vanessa's eyes filled instantly. You don't understand. No, Ethan interrupted calmly. I think I finally do. The silence afterward felt unbearable. I picked up my purse slowly. I'm leaving. Honestly, I couldn't stay another second. This had stopped being satisfying. Now it just felt sad. I moved toward the door. Then Ethan's voice stopped me. Major Donovan. I turned. His expression remained fixed on me, not Vanessa. Please stay. Behind him, my sister stood frozen in the center of the study, realizing something devastating in real time. For the first time in her life, she was no longer the person people admired most. I should have left anyway. That's what the smarter version of me would have done. Walk out quietly, drive back to my hotel, let the night collapse behind me without watching the wreckage. But something kept me there. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the memory of our father standing in steel-toed boots at 6 a.m. telling me running away doesn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it means abandoning yourself. Or maybe a part of me simply needed Vanessa to finally see what she'd spent her whole life refusing to see. So I stayed. When we returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed completely. Not louder. Softer. People spoke in lower voices now, like guests at a funeral trying not to disturb the dead. And in a strange way, something had died tonight. Not Vanessa's engagement. Not yet. The illusion. That perfect polished image she'd built for years had cracked wide open under the weight of truth. The orchestra resumed playing quietly near the staircase, but even the music sounded hesitant. Ethan walked beside me toward the center of the room while Vanessa followed several steps behind, visibly struggling to regain control of herself. Her mascara still looked flawless. Her smile did not. Someone from the event staff approached nervously. "Mr. Carlyle, the presentation." Ethan nodded absently. Then he surprised everyone again. Instead of returning to the stage alone, he turned toward me. "Would you stand with me for a moment?" I hesitated immediately. "That's not necessary." "I think it is." The room noticed. Every head turned as Ethan guided me toward the small stage beneath the chandeliers. I could practically feel Vanessa unraveling behind us. The event coordinator adjusted the microphone with shaking hands while whispers spread through the crowd. Ethan waited until the room settled. Then he spoke calmly. When tonight began, he said this event was supposed to celebrate a future partnership. A few awkward glances moved toward Vanessa. But sometimes, Ethan continued, life introduces you to the people who deserve recognition when you least expect it. I immediately knew where this was going. And I hated public praise almost as much as I hated pity. "Ethan." He gave me a small apologetic look before continuing anyway. "Many people in this room know me as a businessman," he said. "But before any contracts, before Carlyle Defense, my father served in the Air Force." That changed the room again. Instantly. Older Americans especially react differently once military family enters the conversation. You could feel respect deepen. Ethan glanced toward me. "So when I tell you Major Claire Donovan has likely saved American lives through work most of us will never fully know about, I want you to understand I don't say that lightly." Silence. Real silence. Not uncomfortable. Respectful. Somewhere near the front, an older veteran lowered his head slightly toward me. I almost couldn't look at him. Ethan continued, "People often celebrate visibility, wealth, public success." His voice hardened just slightly, but some of the most important people in this country serve quietly. I saw Vanessa standing near the back now. Alone. Nobody clustered around her anymore. Nobody reached for her attention. For the first time in her adult life, she had become invisible in a room designed to worship status. And I realized then that invisibility terrified her more than failure ever could. A man near the bar suddenly spoke up. "Major Donovan," he called carefully, "were you involved in the Northern Corridor evacuation?" I recognized him immediately, a military journalist, gray hair, sharp eyes. "Thomas Reed." "Wonderful." "There were several operations," I answered diplomatically. His expression changed instantly. That was confirmation enough. "Oh my God," someone whispered nearby. Reed stepped forward slowly. "I covered defense briefings tied to that extraction for months." He looked around the room in disbelief. Most analysts believed the field strategist involved was a senior male officer nearing retirement. A few people actually laughed softly at that. Reed shook his head. There was a phrase attached to the reports. I already knew what he was about to say. "Please don't." He looked directly at me. "The officer who never leaves anyone behind." The ballroom went completely still again. That phrase followed me for years after Syria. I hated it. Not because it wasn't meaningful, because every time I heard it I remembered the people we still couldn't save. Ethan looked at me with something close to awe now. Vanessa looked sick. And then came the final collapse. One woman approached Vanessa carefully. "You never mentioned your sister was Major Donovan." Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Another guest added awkwardly, "Your father sounded like an incredible man." That did it. I watched something inside Vanessa finally break. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Her shoulders lowered. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for me to realize she was exhausted too. Exhausted from pretending. Exhausted from maintaining an identity built entirely around impressing people. Ethan stepped down from the stage slowly and walked toward her. The room held its breath. Vanessa looked up at him with desperate hope. "Ethan?" He reached into his jacket pocket and removed the engagement ring box she'd made him carry earlier for photographs. A visible tremor passed through the crowd. "Vanessa," he said gently, "I think you care more about status than truth." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Please don't do this here." "I'm not ending this because of Claire." Her face crumpled slightly. I'm ending it because I finally understand who you are when admiration disappears. No yelling. No cruelty. Honestly, that made it worse. Vanessa grabbed his arm desperately. You're humiliating me. Ethan's expression turned deeply sad. No, he said softly. I think life already did that tonight. The ring box remained in his hand. Closed. Final. And suddenly my sister exploded. This is her fault, she shouted, pointing directly at me. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. She always does this tears-streaked, carefully applied makeup now. Claire walks around acting morally superior while everyone worships her because she suffered more. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. That was the cruelest part. I stepped toward her slowly. Vanessa. No, she snapped. You ruined everything. My chest tightened painfully. Because underneath all the anger I heard something else. Fear. Little girl fear. The fear of not being enough. The fear our father never loved her the way she wanted. The fear that no amount of money could erase where we came from. And suddenly, standing there beneath glittering chandeliers while wealthy strangers watched my sister fall apart, I didn't feel victorious. I felt heartbroken. No, I said quietly. You ruined yourself the moment you started being ashamed of people who loved you. Vanessa stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then silence swallowed the room again. One by one, guests began quietly leaving. Not dramatically. Just slowly. The orchestra stopped playing. Servers disappeared into side halls. And within minutes, the massive ballroom that Vanessa spent months perfecting no longer looked glamorous. It looked empty. I picked up my coat from a nearby chair and walked toward the exit. Nobody tried to stop me this time. Except Ethan. He caught up to me near the front doors just as cool night air swept through the entrance. Claire, he called gently. I turned. And for the first time that night, there was no audience left. If this story touched you in any way, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever watched someone underestimate the quietest person in the room, or seen a family torn apart by pride status or old wounds that never healed? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that real strength often lives in the people nobody notices at first. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas, revenge stories, and powerful second-chance journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story. We share new heartfelt stories every day, and I'd love for you to continue this journey with us.